And there's no bigger story in the news today than the story of O.J. Simpson passing away from cancer at the age of 76. O.J. Simpson garnered national media attention long before the infamous Bronco 60-mile chase on Los Angeles freeways back in 1994. He rose to fame as a football player at USC, becoming a Heisman Trophy winner and going on to be drafted by the NFL and becoming a superstar for the Buffalo Bills. And he broke more barriers, not just on the football field. He became one of the first African-American athletes to get a major advertising contract. So if you didn't know O.J. Simpson from football, because you didn't watch a lot of football, you knew him from watching him run through airports on those Hertz commercials. Those commercials made him a household name. In addition to those commercials, he also became one of the first Black athletes to get a major contract to be a commentator for Monday Night Football. Again, one of the first Black athletes to become a movie star of sorts, getting lots of roles in big motion pictures. In many ways, he transcended what it meant to be a Black athlete in the 1970s and 80s. And not only did he transcend his position as an athlete, OJ was famous for saying he wasn't Black, that he was, quote unquote, just OJ. His sentiments about his Blackness angered many in the African-American community. But you saw that same community, the Black community, rally to his defense during that trial, the double murder trial of his ex-wife and her friend, Ron Goldman, murdered in her home, and O.J. Simpson later charged with those two murders. It became a trial that redefined in many ways our criminal justice system, redefined in many ways our policing, particularly cases involving DNA, the collection of DNA. And many folks are mourning today the loss of O.J. Simpson. Others are still scratching their heads trying to understand a man who has been described as both controversial and complex. Definitely a complex and controversial relationship with the Black community. We're going to talk about O.J. Simpson, his life, his legacy, his football career, and that legal trial, the trial that made Johnnie Cochran a household name, that made stars out of the judge, out of some of the witnesses, out of the prosecuting attorneys, a trial that really ushered in a new era of crime shows and court TV. Even a network, court TV network, was born out of the O.J. Simpson trial. When we come forward, I have one of my legal experts, Mansfield Collins, who was in Los Angeles at the time of the trial, is a criminal defense attorney himself, as well as Jamar Brown is joining us. He's the executive director of the Texas Democratic Party. We're talking about all the racial issues. Did OJ's trial divide the nation along racial lines, or did it shine a bright light on racial divisions that were already there? Well, speaking of freeways, I was on the 405 freeway this morning. And if you live in Los Angeles, you know what I'm talking about. And my phone started ringing off the hook with news media contacting me about the news that O.J. Simpson had died. I've been on TV and radio all day talking about his life, his legacy, and that infamous 1995 trial. So we got a lot to cover. I want to start with his football career, because if you're not a football fan, you may not have even known who O.J. Simpson was until you saw those Hertz commercials. So Mansfield, you have been in Los Angeles for a minute. And you probably were here when O.J. Simpson made his debut, appearance on the USC team, and when he went on to become the Heisman Trophy winner. So take us back to the early days and tell us who O.J. Simpson was, because a lot of people don't know his history.
O.J. Simpson was probably the first Black superstar in terms of entertainment and in terms of celebrity for the Black community. He went to USC, played football at USC, was a Heisman Trophy winner. It was clear when you watched him at USC that you were watching something special. And the Black community more or less looked at him as the continuation of Jim Brown. We saw a legend in the making when we looked at O.J. Simpson. He ran track. He was fast, and he was strong, and he was big. So, and he was running through tackles. So he was everything that that the media and the audience wanted to see, and he was scoring a bunch of touchdowns. He was everything the media and the audience wanted to see. And in the Black community, he was a hero. When he went to the pros, he did the same thing. Because there's always that transition when you go from college to the pros. Can you do the same thing? He not only did the same thing, but he even did it better when he went to the pros. And then he started doing television commercials, Hertz television commercials. He was the first Black athlete to do prime time commercials for major companies. He was the first one. He then went into the movies and had an excellent acting career. And then all of a sudden, one day, we turned on the television.
Well, we're gonna get to that one day. I'm glad you gave us that history, because I was having a conversation with my daughter, and we think, those of us who are slightly over 35 think that everybody knows who O.J. Simpson is. And my daughter told me it was not until she watched the American Crime Story, where Cuba Gooding Jr. plays him, that she learned about O.J. Simpson. So as I was telling her about the frenzy today, she didn't quite get it. As you just said, he was the Black community's first real superstar. We have to remember that we're talking the 80s, and there's a whole generation of Black folks, you know, that have been born since then that don't relate to him in that way, and probably are asking, Jamar, what's all the fuss about? He was married to a white woman. Okay, so like, you know, why is that a big deal? So help us understand, Jamar, like for those people like my daughter who, you know, like, can we go back to regular programming, understand how significant these barriers were that O.J. Simpson was breaking through?
Yeah, well, the thing is, you know, to be quite honest, I'm close in age to you, maybe a few years older, where, you know, we learned of O.J. Simpson through the trial. We learned who he was, and then once we saw the trial taking place,
I don't even think she was born in the trial.
Okay, well, yeah, I remember the trial. I remember watching, and my parents like, "You too young. You need to go sit down somewhere." But, but you know, and so that's a lot of like my first, right? You know, I didn't get to watch the games. Of course, we went back and, you know, we watched, you know, over the years, and we got to learn all these things, right? That he was the first African American to do certain things. But in addition to everything Mansfield said, right, he also was one of the first African American athletes to really monetize, to break into a new economic barrier. And I think we don't talk about that either. To really, how do you monetize your talent? And how do you monetize your skill and hold the league and hold companies and different platforms accountable to some of that? And we see that now with our generation. And so actually a lot of the lessons he taught, even if we didn't watch him growing up, actually we're learning now in terms of our careers and how we're navigating these things. And so I think that the lessons that he taught, I think his whole career is important, and it does matter to this generation. However, if you were there for the trial, that's what you know. And I think that, you know, we have to sometimes look past that and look at what the accomplishments were in terms of some of that and how that parlays today. And so that's the generational divide, in my opinion.
That's a great point. And you're right. Name, image, and likeness. Big in sports today. Athletes are now being able to cash in on their name, image, and likeness while they are still in college. Some of them making millions and millions of dollars. And O.J. Simpson was one of the first ones, not while in college, but after college, and to monetize his talents beyond sports. Mansfield, again, I was trying to give my daughter this lesson about athletes. This was an era where you were told, shut up and dribble. And you were told shut up and dribble because there was this stereotype, this notion that if you were a Black athlete, you were probably uneducated. You probably left college before you graduated. And when you were in college, somebody else was taking your test and doing the work. So you weren't doing a whole lot there anyhow. You know, they weren't given media training. They weren't the articulate, well-spoken commentators and, you know, folks that we see today. It's kind of hard for her to imagine, but you were there, you and I were there. So we know what it was like. And when you would see a Black athlete on TV, some of us would cringe. We would, you know, like, oh, because, you know, a lot of times the media perpetuated these very, very negative stereotypes. And a lot of these guys didn't get their education. They were exploited in a lot of ways.
You're so correct, Areva. OJ was not the standard Black athlete. He was universally recognized in the Black community, but he was also universally recognized in the white community. But you're correct. He broke all kinds of barriers. He didn't meet the stereotypical assessment that usually the media gives to a Black athlete during that time. And he was able to turn it into something that we just sort of were marveled at. I mean, every year there was something new that OJ was doing that was furthering, as Jamar said, monetizing his career. He was very good at that. And that's why when we turn the corner and get to this trial and these charges filed against him, sort of the Black community's first reaction was, well, wait a minute, you're trying to tear down our hero now. And so there was a lot of suspicion and a lot of doubt to start with in terms of whether the charges were proper.
So let's do that. Let's talk about the trial. Obviously, that infamous, and you probably have seen it, Jamar, the 60-mile slow, I don't even know if we call it a police chase because they weren't really chasing him, just a slow drive. We were told that he had a gun to his head by his friend that was driving the car, the Bronco, that he was suicidal. He had been told that he was being charged with these murders, and I guess he was trying to escape. It wasn't really clear what he was trying to do, but people came out on the roads, on the highway, and it became this big spectacle. It became a circus. Even before the trial began, there was this circus-like nature. Some people were cheering as he was doing this slow getaway. What do you make of that?
Yeah, well, I think it goes back to what Mansfield was just saying at the end of his remarks is you're talking about our hero. Here's a guy, we don't know him for a police chase. We know him for running on a football field. We know him for making good entertainment on TV. We don't know him for breaking the law. We don't know him for being a murderer. We don't know him for being an abuser, right? The things that were being said in the media even after he was arrested and before the trial. And so what the Black community, especially at that time, right, when we're coming out of the 80s into the 90s, these are our first millionaires, right? These are some of our first millionaires, right? These are some of our first really highly successful people that actually had platforms, right, on major television networks, etc. And so there is that level of when you get to certain heights of your career, what attacks do you face? And is this another attack on his character? Is this another attack on the perception that our community built around him? And two, because we saw him reach the top, we wanted to protect him so that we had opportunity for other people to come behind now, right? We see college athletes coming out of college as millionaires, walking into the league, right? In a different way. And so I think that that's where you saw some of that divide. And then obviously everything played out. And it's very hard to sometimes watch because you also want to protect your hero and you also want to protect your community. And I think we're still that way today. If something happened, God forbid, I'm not saying this will, to President Obama, I think we all will be up in arms, right? Because the historic moment of who he was and what he represented for the country, but also particularly Black people.
No, really good point. And I think those crowds, Mansfield, put it in context because this is 94. Let's go back to 92. What had happened in 1992 in Los Angeles? And I don't think you can talk about the 94 murder charges and the 95 trial without understanding where this community was, where the Los Angeles community was, where the country was on the issue of race. So set that stage for us.
Well, you're correct, Areva. 1992, we had Rodney King and the beating of Rodney King. We all saw that. And then we saw the miscarriage of justice when we saw those 5 police officers get acquitted. And then, of course, we had the Rodney King riots in Los Angeles. Yes, Los Angeles was a tinderbox during that period of time. And we were very suspicious as to whether the system, the criminal justice system, could give a Black man a fair trial. And because they didn't give Rodney King a fair trial in the Simi Valley courthouse. And just to also underscore this point, O.J. Simpson was so big during that period of time that during his slow chase, not only did everybody go to the freeway if they could to get a glimpse of it, but that has never been duplicated since that time. No president, no governor, no celebrity has ever had that outpouring, and that was support. Those people were not saying, you criminal, you murderer. They were saying, don't do it, OJ. Turn yourself in. You're going to be all right. That was the census of what those folks were doing.
You know, one of the interviews I did this morning was for the UK, and one of their reporters was recounting that story of the slow chase and the people out on the freeway, and kind of dripping in sarcasm, judgment, critical of the people not having what both of you just provided, that backdrop of how O.J. Simpson was one of the first millionaires, one of the first super successful athletes, a hero in the Black community. And as you said, Mansfield, we were trying to encourage him not to take his own life. We were telling him, we got you. You can get through this. You know, turn yourself in. Don't kill yourself. And I think this reporter in his brain thought folks should have been shouting, you murderer, you know, you horrible person, you monster. And it just really shines such a bright light on the racial divide. You know, I asked the question coming into the segment, did the trial of O.J. Simpson divide our country along racial lines, or did it reveal those already existing deep, deep, deep fissures? Jamar, I would imagine if you ask 5 white people and 5 Black people today about OJ, you would get different responses. There, to this day, people are still very entrenched in their beliefs about his guilt or innocence.
Yeah, but I think a huge part of the racial divide is how Black people have been perceived in this country, and how that carries around events that happen with and for and to Black people in this country. And so usually when the criminal justice system hasn't been fair to Black people, usually white people have jumped on board and carried those same perceptions, right? Carried those same messages. And we've seen that. And so I think, to your point, right, if you ask 5 Black people, 5 white people, you're going to get 2 different things, because in the 1990s, right before they passed the crime bill, it was, yes, these Black and brown people are criminals. Oh yeah, if they were standing before a judge, they must have done it, right? And these sort of things that are happening. And so people didn't look, white people wouldn't have looked at OJ as a football player, right? An athlete, as somebody who transformed the community. They looked at what they saw on TV and didn't look at what was past the television. And that's what we were able to do.
So interesting how quickly they turned on him. This hero that we just said was able to transcend race and become integrated in many ways into the white community. When those charges were lodged against him, boy, did we see a difference in the way he was treated and responded to. That 1995 double murder trial that took place in a courtroom right here in Los Angeles, California. It's a trial that lasted a year, broadcast on major networks daily. Country riveted, glued to the television screen, watching this trial play out of an African-American man accused of killing his ex-wife, a white woman, and her white friend. Many in the LA community believe that he was guilty. It was a slam dunk case, and it would be a pretty shut and closed case. O.J. Simpson had what is now known as the Dream Team: F. Lee Bailey, Robert Shapiro, and of course, Johnny Cochran leading that team. All of them becoming superstars and household names. The judge even became a household name. There were several witnesses who played pivotal roles in the trial. International media, I mean, media from all over the world camped outside that courtroom, and it became one of the biggest stories of 1995 and beyond. So Mansfield, you are a criminal defense lawyer. I'm sure you, like the rest of us, were glued to your television. Probably were friends with Johnny Cochran and maybe had some inside information, but take us to what happened to Nicole Brown Simpson, her friend Ron Goldman, and how do we get to charges against OJ?
Well, OJ had divorced his wife, and he was in the process, according to OJ, he was in the process of trying to get back together with his wife. And that wasn't working out. And OJ indicated that he was going into another direction with someone else, and he had a girlfriend. But then all of a sudden, we hear that his wife, his ex-wife, and his ex-wife's boyfriend now have been killed in a violent incident at their apartment complex. And the rumors automatically are spreading that it must have been O.J. Simpson that did it, because there was some kind of history of uncharged prior domestic violence situations involving O.J. and his wife. And that hit the media like a tidal wave. In a sense, almost like in the Mark Ridley Thomas case, the media went after O.J. You say we build up our heroes, and then the media's job seems to be to tear them down. So the media immediately started shaping the story that it must have been O.J. Who else could have done it? He had this history. And so the media was going after O.J., just like the media went after Mark Ridley Thomas. The difference is O.J. Simpson actually had, after jury selection, a jury of his peers. There were 9 black jurors out of 12 in O.J.'s jury pool, final jury. Mark Ridley Thomas only had 2 black jurors in his trial. There's another distinction that I just want to draw before we really get back into O.J. So O.J. was tried in the Los Angeles Superior Court. Mark Ridley Thomas was tried in the federal court. Those are decisions that you have to sort of look at and say, well, why didn't Mark Ridley Thomas get charged and tried in Los Angeles Superior Court? Curran Price is being charged in the Los Angeles Superior Court. Why wasn't Mark Ridley Thomas there? The only thing I can think of is that the jury pool is so different that if in fact O.J. Simpson's case had been brought in federal court, he probably would have been found guilty, because the jury pool makeup is aligned against having black jurors on the panel. So the real distinction is O.J. was very lucky that he was in the Los Angeles Superior Court for that jury trial. And he was very lucky that he had a dream team. He had someone on that team. Johnny Cochran became the greatest lawyer in our generation, unmatched by anybody else. And he opened the door for a lot of black lawyers to follow in his footsteps. Very few can, but he still opened the door.
Yeah, let's get into, that trial. Again, the trial of the century, Jamar, the trial televised every day. Like I said, on major networks, people were missing time from work, getting in trouble at work, trying to watch their television set. We didn't have social media, so we couldn't, watch it on Facebook or watch it on, any social media platform. So people literally had to watch it on television. Why were you, as a kid, so fascinated? You said you were a kid, your parents were telling you to stop watching it. Why were you so fascinated with this trial?
Yeah, but I think that was the thing, right? It was the celebrity of it. It was all the media attention. Everybody was talking about it. And I think part of it is because of who he was, right? He wasn't Joe Schmo, for lack of better words, right? That lived down the street, that probably is on trial and not getting the same kind of attention, right? And things could be happening in that case, right? So for me, that's particularly what it was. And at the time, I was interested in going to law school. And so I was particularly drawn to that. But I think broadly across the board, just kind of what we kind of alluded to was, that was also very formative for me and for a lot of folks in my generation around what race meant in this country, right? Growing up in the 90s and talking about race, experiencing it even in a different way than my parents, my grandparents, my great-grandparents at the time. And you grow up hearing about racial division, but you're not quite sure. And I think that was the first time we had it right in our face, that we actually could see the division of how Black people have had to fight and survive in this country, but white people have misperceived and misjudged Black people, and now are using the system, the criminal justice system, to actually go against this individual who attained a lot of success, right? And there was a lot of back and forth that was happening. And so, as Mansfield said, right, there was there's the judge, there's the lawyers, but the lawyers weren't all Black, right? There was like Rob Kardashian, I think, was one of the lawyers, right? And so it wasn't also this all Black people trying to protect this Black man, right? He was smart enough to have lawyers who represented different communities as part of his case. And so those are some of the things that I think drew out, in particular, of how we started to look at some of the racial divisions and how Black people were viewed in the country. And this was also a successful Black man, and how he was being treated by the system.
It's interesting. Alan Dershowitz was one of the attorneys for O.J. Simpson at the time. And we know Alan Dershowitz, Harvard professor, has now become pretty much a MAGA lawyer,
Yeah.
very much
Oddly
aligned
enough.
with Fox News, Donald Trump, and Trumpism. Mansfield, you said there was a presumption. Yes, we don't want to minimize domestic violence. And unfortunately, domestic violence, intimate partner violence before O.J. Simpson wasn't taken very seriously in this country. If you were beaten up or abused by your partner and you called the police and they showed up and your partner was someone like O.J. Simpson, they would give him a slap on the wrist. They wouldn't arrest him. And we know Nicole Brown had called the police on multiple occasions alleging that O.J. Simpson had engaged in violence against her. All that changed after that was revealed. The way prosecutors, the way law enforcement treated domestic violence was very different. But there was this presumption that if he used violence against her before, he's got to be angry and jealous about, her friend Ron Goldman, and he had to do it. But there was a problem, Mansfield, and the problem was the LAPD. So this is, again, going back to 1992, some of the racism, the pervasive systemic racism in the Los Angeles Police Department was revealed during the civil unrest in 1992 as white officers would protect affluent neighborhoods, affluent homes, and literally refuse to go into some of the black neighborhoods, some of the brown neighborhoods, and provide that same level of protection. Bill Gates, the now infamous racist police chief at the time of 1992. So again, that's the backdrop. So here is the prosecuting attorney, Marsha Clark, Christopher Darden, let's just face it, outgunned by this dream team on all fronts, not just their legal acumen, their courtroom swagger, I'll call it, but their media savviness, all of that in favor of the dream team. But a bigger problem for the prosecution is their case was put together by a very incompetent and racist LA Police Department. Talk about the role that the police department played in really sinking the prosecution's case.
Well, I can tell you this. When Mark Fuhrman testified, and then it was revealed during his testimony, during cross-examination of his testimony, that he had used the N-word, and I'm not going to say the N-word on your radio show, but he used the N-word 44 times in connection with an interview that he was being interviewed in to be a consultant on a movie that a filmmaker was writing a script for. If I had been on the jury, I just need to be honest with you, Areva, and your audience. If I was on a jury, it would be very difficult for me to accept anything coming from the LAPD Police Department, knowing that they had someone, a chief detective, investigating and collecting evidence and making opinions and making findings that was so racist that he felt that it was okay to use the N-word in a very casual manner all the time. So yes, there were, this case not only dealt with incompetence, but the racial overtones when that hit the courtroom. Let's just put it this way. The country, the world was on fire to hear that for the first time, because that really was the first time that the entire public, the entire community, white, black, yellow, brown, could actually hear that a police officer was so racist and felt so protected that he could use the N-word on a casual basis all the time.
And let's not forget, he was charged with perjury. He perjured himself on the witness stand. He lied about making those racial slurs, racial epithets. And he was, after the O.J. Simpson trial, Mark Fuhrman was charged with perjury. He pled no contest. He didn't serve jail time. But the star witness, and he was supposed to be LAPD's star detective, was actually charged with perjury. And I don't care what color you are, if a police department has as its star witness someone that perjures themselves, the prosecution can basically pack up their bags and go home. When we come forward, we got to talk about the lasting racial implications of that trial and why today many, many white people still believe that O.J. Simpson killed his ex-wife and her friend. So Johnny Cochran does something that's brilliant in that courtroom, because cases are not just about the law. He has O.J. stand up and try to put on the black gloves, because what the prosecution's case was built on was that whoever killed Nicole and Ron wore these black gloves. There's one at the scene of the crime and one at O.J.'s home, which many people believe was planted there by one of these racist cops. And O.J. Simpson, 6'1", 200 plus pounds, stood there struggling. Now, some people said it was all theater, but who knows? He was struggling to get those gloves on. And Johnny Cochran said, and we'll never forget, if the glove doesn't fit, you must acquit. And for many people, they believe that was a turning point. And my producer reminds me, yes, it's not just white people that believe O.J. committed these murders. Many African Americans believe it. Many people have theories that O.J.'s older son was somehow involved in helping him commit the murders. So there have been all kinds of conspiracy theories and theories about what happened. No one was ever charged other than O.J. Simpson, not really any other serious suspects. This jury, though, predominantly Black, as Mansfield said, acquits O.J. Simpson. We'll never forget that scene where Johnny Cochran is grasping his client's shoulder, and they're all jubilant and happy about the verdict. But this, we didn't see folks take to the street, Jamar, but a lot of people, Black and white, but predominantly white people, were very, very angry because in this country, a Black man cannot get away with killing a white woman. I mean, we have to put that in historical context. That is just never, ever the way our criminal justice system is supposed to work.
Well, that's number one. And I think number two, part of some of the issue, I think also is too, this system that they were trying his life under wasn't built to protect him. And somehow he made it through this system, right? Through the trial and everything that happened, in the courtroom, right? Because typically what would have happened in a lot of cases, there were a lot of Black men, they go before the court, there is some kind of trial, there's tons of evidence thrown into the courtroom, and then they're put in jail. And this is the first time, especially with the defense team led by a Black lawyer, where, in lack of better words, where they beat the system, right? Where he was acquitted in this particular case. And so I think that that's one of the things. But what we saw coming out of that was a lot of people connected his guilt, not so much to the evidence presented in the trial, but so much to his race and who he was going into the trial. And that's the difference when sometimes you have someone who's highly successful or a celebrity, athlete, etc., and then they go into trial. Sometimes it gets very caught up in who the person is versus the actual evidence. And obviously, you all have already outlined certain points where evidence was presented. The star witness was tried on perjury and all those things. We don't have to go through that. And so when you get so caught up in the individual and you get away from the evidence, you land in sometimes this place where even when he walked out of the courtroom acquitted, it was still about him and what happened with him in the terms of the trial and in the system where they thought he would be guilty.
And Mansfield, it was an odd position for a lot of Black folks because Robert is right. A lot of Black people believe he did it. A lot of Black people by now were not big fans of O.J. Simpson. They believe he had turned his back on the Black community, that he thought he had somehow transcended race, that because he was married to a white woman, because he was accepted in the white advertising world, the commercial world, the entertainment world, that he was no longer Black. And he once said, when someone asked him, was he Black? He says, no, I'm OJ. So Black folks had a lot of mixed feelings about this. They felt good, as Jamar said, that a Black man, quote unquote, beat the system. But they also felt conflicted because this was no longer their hero. This was not the guy they were rooting for, the guy from the projects in San Francisco that made it big. This was the guy now that made it big and turned his back on the folks that were there for him and were a part of why he made it so big.
Yes, you're correct. And if I remember during that period of time, the conversations that I had with members of the Black community, the minority view was that he was guilty. The majority view in the Black community at that time was that he was not guilty. The majority view, almost, I would say 3-1. At the same time, whenever we had a conversation with a white person about OJ, especially after the verdict, it became very tense, and it always bordered on whether I should continue this conversation and risk losing a friend or an association, or should I just, plow ahead in the interest of principles? And it reminds me of having conversations today about Donald Trump with folks that are so gung-ho about Donald Trump. This was almost a precursor for the racial divide in America, almost a precursor to what we're going through right now with Donald Trump and the MAGA group. This was almost a precursor to that. But the
excellent
other lesson,
point, man. Excellent point. It became like religion and politics, right? When you were in a party or at an event and OJ would come up, you had to make a decision.
Yeah.
Do I sit here and support him and listen to, you know, get into a fight with people who are saying he's a murderer, he's a monster? He, you know, listen to that, try to give them a more nuanced approach about the fact that in our criminal justice system, the prosecution must prove beyond reasonable doubt. And when they don't do that, an acquittal is appropriate. It's not for you or I to try to get into whether the person did it or not. That's not how our system works. That's why they're defense lawyers. Your job is to protect that person's constitutional rights, to make sure they get their due process rights. So you did have to make that choice. And I do think Jamar Mansfield is right. This is pre-MAGA. This is the country being divided over a successful black man who a lot of white folks thought needed to be brought down a notch, a really big notch. And when he wasn't, there was outrage. There was white outrage.
Yes.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think we still see some of that today, unfortunately, right? We got a black president. Donald Trump decided after that, oh no, I'm against everything he put in place. I'm going to run. I'm going to divide the country. I'm going to win the election, and I'm going to dismantle everything that he set up and put things in place, such as now with Roe, lack of protections for reproductive rights, right? Putting 3 Supreme Court justices. That's going to last us for a long time to reverse, right? And so we have to think about those kind of things when we think of our elections and when we think of the discourse that we allow, right, around our elections and around policy and how we manage our systems also. And then the other piece that's important around the OJ trial too, this was right before the 1994 crime bill, right? And so when you start thinking about the long conversation over decades that we've had around crime and justice and the criminal justice system, those racial divisions still exist. And now the MAGA movement is still using them to this day.
Yeah, the MAGA movement is bigger and stronger than ever. And, you know, right underneath the conversations we were having, Mansfield, about the legal system was really a bigger conversation about race and place and where people belong and what people should be in what spaces and places. And as much as we were celebrating OJ for breaking these barriers, there were many white people who believed that he had gotten what they would call too uppity, that he was, in places and spaces, particularly married to a white woman. We don't have time to get into that, but that was, again, interracial marriages were not nearly as prevalent in the 1980s as they are today. And it was frowned upon by many. And a lot of white people did not approve of a black man being married to a white woman. We've got to leave it there. Such an interesting conversation. Thanks to both of you for your insights and enlightening our viewers and our listeners on this really important topic. Next voice that you hear will be Robin Ayers in the Raw Report right here on KBLA Talk 15.